Okay, cool. There we go. All right. Chapter 13. Abraham and Lot separate. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the Negev. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and birds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, I don't know, were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley, and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can also be counted. Arise, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord. Okay, so this is a shorter chapter, and as I was saying before I started recording, I got sick this week with food poisoning, um, and so my notes are kind of sparse on this, um, and almost all of them. Usually, the way that I go through this is right. I kind of start at the top and kind of go through and mention specific things, and we're sort of going to do that. But a lot of what I want to talk about is kind of more high level. Um, and so I want to so usually whenever this passage is taught, right, um, it's taught from this idea that um, Abraham is being wise and Lot is not being wise, right? The way that this is traditionally taught is, oh, Lot is looking at the fact that the Jordan is well watered, um, and uh, he's he's ignoring the fact that that the men in Sodom were wicked, um, and he's choosing looks over godliness. Is basically the way that people generally teach the story. Um, and what I want to say is that is I don't think that's quite right. Um, Kind of like what I mentioned in the last chapter. I think that actually, in the last chapter, I mentioned that I don't think that we should see what Abraham's actions were as being wise, and I really don't think we should see Abraham's actions here as being wise either. Um, they might be wiser than Lot's, but I think there's actually lots of problems with what um, Abram is doing here. Um, if we think about where, okay, so the other thing that I kind of want to largely talk about, so I'm gonna let's hang up that point about them being unwise, so that I can talk about the other kind of thematic thing that I want to talk about. I think the other thematic thing that's going on in this chapter is more about what we were talking about on the themes of naming, separating, and success, right? So we've had this running theme of men who try to make a name for themselves versus people that are trying to follow after the name Hashem, which is God. And with what Abraham's doing, by following after Hashem, by following after the name, God says that he is going to make him into a great name, right? And what we're going to consistently see is that Abram has not really a full grasp of what that promise means. If we think about where Abram is at the start, right? He's very rich. He's come up out of Egypt, right? If you think about kind of the monomyth, right? Like story arc. The story is you go down into the underworld, you do the thing, and you get the treasure. In Abram's mind, probably, he's done that, right? He has become successful, right? He has, like in previous chapters, he has, he is like before the face of the Lord. He has become successful by the standards of the men around him, by the standards of what I would argue, and I have argued in the past, by the standards of the Nephilim, by the standards of powerful men, by the standards of worldliness, he has become successful, right? And when you become successful, when you become large, you no longer stay a part of your of the bigger tribe, right? Like if you're a small tribe in a bigger tribe, you don't start delineating yourself. You don't start separating off from them until you become big enough that you can do that, until you're big enough to sustain yourself. That's how you make a name for yourself. You have to become big enough and successful enough that you can do that. And so by those standards and by the cultural standards, Abram has, quote unquote, arrived, right? But as we know, because we know the full story, we're still very early in Abraham's arc, right? His name hasn't even changed yet, right? And so what I would argue is that what I think is actually going on here is the way that Abram. So, and again, I've been kind of hitting on the themes of maturity, and how Abram is fundamentally acting immature because he is thinking about himself, right? And at this point, it's very clear that he is thinking about himself, and I think he sees himself as being successful, and so therefore I can now separate out from that larger group that was my family. So remember before how I said that like his larger family, Terah, was representative by the fact of him, his wife, and Lot. Well, he's not going to leave his wife, at least not yet, right? That does happen to some degree in the next chapter. But he's going to strip off the first branch, which is Lot, and he's going to separate out from Lot. And I don't think, right? I even saw one commentary that was trying to say that, like, I think the way that most people teach this, they teach this as like Abraham, good guy, Lot, bad guy. And I really don't think that's what's going on, right? I think the most hint that you could get to something like that is the fact that this verse here, where it says, "Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord." Oh, okay. Well, that means that Lot chose poorly because the people in the land were against God. Well, were the Canaanites really for Yahweh? No, they weren't, right? and so to me that argument like doesn't really hold. Um that like the Canaanites and the Perizzites or whatever that were dwelling on they were good, but the Sodomites were wicked. And it's like they were both kind of wicked. Maybe they were worse. I don't know. I think that this verse is not necessarily. I don't think the intention of it is to say that it's worse than them. I think it's just different. You could maybe make that argument because later on, the whole reason why the whole land isn't taken is because, right, the sin of the Amalekites isn't great enough. But I think that's not quite right. What I think is actually going on here is related to some symbolism stuff. And namely, it's symbolism of left hand versus right hand. So I think it's kind of interesting that we have this verse here. If you take the left hand, then I will go right. And if you take the right, then I will go left. So one of the things about right hand versus left hand symbolism is that left hand and right hand is fundamentally perspective based, right? So like right now, I'm holding up my right hand, right? But if you were standing across from me, like my right hand would be on your left side, right? And so right-handedness, left-handedness, chirality, it brings it's perspective based, and whenever you try to think about it, it turns things. Okay, and so that's really important for that turning aspect is really important for understanding right hand, left hand symbolism. Usually, right hand is associated with good things, and left hand is associated with bad things. And so, because of that, you would think that, okay, it doesn't say which way Lot went, but from a symbolic standpoint, Lot goes to the left. Okay, he makes the bad choice, right? And the other reason why I would argue for this symbolic thing is because the other aspect of one of the other aspects of something being left-handed symbolically is that it goes out and it comes back. Okay? And usually that coming back, well, I get a lot of times that coming back is not necessarily under good conditions. So a good way to think about this, I think, is actually and also so I'll say that's generally bad, but also just because the right hand to help my argument of where I also think that Abram is doing unwise things. Just because the right hand stays doesn't mean that the right hand is also being wise. Okay. What's my best evidence for that? My best evidence for that is the story of the prodigal son, right? And I think the story of the prodigal son actually mirrors this story pretty closely, right? And so in the story of the prodigal son, everybody knows about the prodigal son because he's the one that goes out and then he is forced to come back under bad conditions. And he gets, by virtue of the fact that he comes back, he gets redeemed. And what a lot of people don't remember is that there's actually a second brother in that story. And that second brother never leaves. He's the older brother. He's the steadfast brother. He's always there. But actually, at the end of the story, he actually does something very unwise, and he gets mad at the fact that his father is celebrating the other brother. And so, I don't want to get too sidetracked on that, but that's just my little bit of a case for right hand, left-handedness. This is also related to like right hand, left hand of God, and people will say this where like angels are the right hand of God and like demons are the left hand of God, and demons are the left hand of God in the sense that, right, by the demons tormenting people, that turns people back so that they come back to God, right? And so you have that symbolism going on, and I think that's what we have going on with Lot, and we'll get to that in the later chapters whenever we actually have that. But I think that there's a lot of that going on there of what it means to be out in the world, out of God's protection, and all of that. This is usually a sort of a place where I would stop. So I'm going to stop there just for a second. Any comments or questions about anything that I've said so far? No? Okay. Oh, I lost Evan. Yeah, Evan said he wasn't going to be here for long. Okay. So, back to my overall point. So, I think it's most analysis are correct that Lot is making so. If they're both making, and if my view is that both men are making an unwise, incorrect decision, what should they have done? I think what they should have done is they should have been leaders and got their herdsmen to get along, right? The idea, I think it's kind of silly that they're so large that the land cannot support both of them dwelling together. What? Like the land is so vast that, supposedly 6 million of them are going to inhabit it later. There's no way that the land couldn't support the two of them being together. I think it's fine that's what the listed reason is, but I don't think that that's a real reason. I think that's a reason that they state, right? And so because of that, I think that they're both being immature, and I think they are both thinking, hey, we have made it, we have gotten big enough that we can basically be our own clans now, right? That's kind of what it is in their heads. And so we're going to separate out and we're going to be our own clans now because we're large enough to do that. And in that thinking, both of them are thinking about themselves and their own station. And from the beginning, with what God said to Abram, right? So let's go back, right? What does he say? He goes, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. Why? So that you will be a blessing, so that you will be a blessing to all of the families of the earth, right? And more specifically, what it's going to be is going to be to your offspring, right? And so this is key, right? The ark, so I think what's happening here, what I would argue is happening, is that Abram thought that he was on this success arc, and he was, what I would say is that he has been, up until this point, still operating and is still largely operating under the mechanisms that the world around him operate in. We saw that with the last story, right? He understands the way that Pharaoh is going to act, and so he comes up with a counterplay to counter what Pharaoh is going to do, right? And that's going to continue to happen to some degree. But as we go on, what's going to happen is God's going to more and more start to ask Abram to operate differently than how the people around him are operating. And the reason he's doing that is because he's trying to get Abram to stop looking at himself and to start looking at the future, right? And let me rephrase that. He's trying to get him to stop looking at his present self and start looking at his future self. And to understand that his future self, that far out self, is his offspring. That his offspring, in a sense, is him. And in order for him to see out far, he needs Abram to be mature, right? And so there's, right, he's done this first mini arc to become successful, but he's going to do a much bigger arc to become a patriarch, right? To become a, right? So I believe meaning of Abram. Oh my goodness. I believe meaning of Abram. Yeah, it means father, right? So Abram means father. High father, exalted father, sure. But Abraham means father of many nations, right? And so he's going to become he's going to be a father to a multitude, right? And that can only happen once he's mature. And the last point that I kind of want to make is here. So the Lord said, lift up your eyes, look from the place where you are, northward, westward, eastward, and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can also be counted. Arise, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So that part right there, okay? Arise and walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. Okay. The land is never given to Abram. Okay? Like, this is important. Abram is a sojourner in the land. He's a traveler. He goes through it. He has sort of base of operations, but he never has a city. He's establishing these altars in high places in different spots, right? But those are not permanent settlements, right? I could be wrong in this, but I think I remember correctly. by the time Abraham dies, the only thing really that he owns is a cave that he ends up burying Sarah in, and that cave ends up becoming like an ancestral mausoleum. He never owns the land in his lifetime, and this is important because God is asking him to walk through a land that he himself doesn't own and that he himself will never own, but that actually he himself will own, and he'll own it forever. So he's asking you to do things for no reward, but actually for all of the reward that you could ever have. And you can only see that paradox and how that oxymoron, however you want to say it, works. You can only see how that works if you're being mature. And what I would argue God's goal is to get Abraham to see that. It's to get Abraham to see, okay, all of this is going to be yours, but just not how you think it's going to be yours.
Kyle, I have a question on that. Sorry,
Yeah,
I don't.
go for it.
Are you getting that because like they were essentially tent people and they weren't building infrastructure there? Is that kind of your thought process on it?
Partially, yes. I mean, yes, because they yes, that would be my argument for why they like don't own the land. And actually, it's pretty
Okay.
clear that they don't own the land because there's an entire chapter that's all about Abraham negotiating to own parts of the land, right? Like that chapter wouldn't be there if they just owned the land. That whole chapter is there so that they can establish, hey, at least this little part, actually, we do own that, right? And so I would argue that there's very different understandings of ownership back in the day, and I mean, even now, like with like you have this with like Bedouin tribes and everything about how they move around, and it's like, okay, do they own this or do they not own it? And a lot of times they'll even be like, if they can have it where like they're not in some part of the land for like years and years and years, but then they'll come back and they'll be like, oh yeah, this was always like our land, and it's just because they're migratory in nature. Um, and so yes, that is my argument that they are not they're not an established people, but they are attempting to become an established people. Yes.
Yeah,
Uh,
that makes sense.
um, but yeah, but that was kind of like I said. This is a short chapter. That was kind of all that I had. So unless you, I mean, I'll open it up to whatever you guys want to talk about.
I did have an additional question on this subject. Um, this is just kind of an observation. I want to see what your guys' thoughts are. But it feels like some of the early people in the Bible um, were sort of sneaky. Like,
Oh yeah,
yeah, you have Abraham doing sneaky stuff,
yep.
then like Jacob is super sneaky.
His name
It's
basically
like,
means sneaky. Yeah.
yeah, it's like multiple generations of sneaky people.
Yes.
And I often wonder like why God kind of chose them because they're not like the most forthright, honest people in the beginning.
No. Uh. Yeah. So I mean, I have I have lots of theories and thoughts on that. Yes. Um. Uh. It has to do with it it fundamentally has to do with the so it all relates back to the themes that I talked about at the beginning of this, at the beginning of this, which is there's a system, there's a hierarchy that the culture and that mankind has made, and especially at the time, that system worked off of primogeniture or whatever, right? It's the word that I can never say properly.
Primogeniture.
Primogeniture, right? The system of the inheritance system, where the firstborn child, traditionally the eldest son, inherits the entirety of the parents' property, titles, or throne upon death, right? So the ancient world pretty much operated on this system entirely, right? And even up until like America, right? To some extent, we somewhat operated on this kind of idea, right? And there's reasons for that, right? But one of the things that the Bible is doing, especially with the stories of the patriarchs, is it's fundamentally undermining that story. And that system is what I would argue is that system is fundamentally connected to the system that I talked about, which is like systems of men, governments, which would be like systems of the Nephilim, right? Which would be, so Pharaoh, Babylon, Tower of Babel, all of that is connected to that idea. And so there's that dichotomy going on. But then there's also the idea, which I also talked about tonight, which is there's kind of two ways that you can combat those systems. There's the immature way, and then there's the mature way. The mature way is going to be God's way, and that's going to operate via self-sacrifice. The immature way is through sneakiness, right? And basically kind of the running theme in all of this is, hey, you can use sneakiness to fight these systems and you will succeed by doing them. But there's downsides to them. And also, it's not the way that God wants you to do them. There's a different way. There's a higher way that you can fight these systems. But when you fight them this way, it's probably going to feel like losing. And that kind of tension is a tension that exists throughout the entire Bible. And you can even see that tension, like that tension should be obvious whenever you start thinking about Jesus, right? Because like, okay, what's the fundamental thing that Jesus is dealing with? Jesus, like in the political scene, right? Right. So in the political scene with Jesus, right, the systems of the Nephilim are going to be Rome, right? But then also, to some extent, right, in his eyes, the Pharisaical system, right? But for most people, it's going to be Rome, right? And it's like, well, okay, how do we fight back against that? Okay, well, the main way people are going to do it is through zealotry. And the way that the zealots are working is by being sneaky, right? Because they're not strong. They're weak, right? If you're not strong, the way that you fight someone that's stronger than you is you have to be sneaky. And it can work. You can have a modicum of success, and you can do different things. But Jesus's way is a higher way, and it involves self-sacrifice, and it involves time. It involves using self-sacrifice and time as a weapon And ultimately, it's going to end up winning more completely than just by being sneaky. Because just being sneaky is the immature way to succeed for yourself, whereas self-sacrifice is the way that you succeed forever. And that's what Jesus does. And of course, as we know, Jesus defeats Rome, right? And so that's how I connect those things and those thoughts.
I like it. I've never heard anybody express those kind of theories. That does kind of explain a lot. And the other thing I like too is how you talked about, how Lot and Abraham split up, and it seemed to be more like a mutual kind of disagreement,
Yeah,
separation. And I've never heard that either, but actually, like in the context, that totally explains a lot. And then, like later, Lot is obvious, like Lot is called back to run with Abraham again. So that's interesting, Kyle. I think that makes sense to me. I never thought about that.
yeah. And that's kind of one of my goals for doing like this Bible study is there's a lot of ways that we get taught these Bible stories whenever you're younger. I mean, I don't know if this is true for everybody. I just remember how I got taught it. And like a lot of times people kind of just look at the context of like the immediate chapter and they're not connecting it with the previous chapters or the preceding chapters. And it's like, no, these aren't just it to me it's really important that we don't think about these as just like these aren't episodic stories, right? This isn't I don't know. This isn't Law and Order. This isn't like NCIS where it's just like every single episode, every single chapter is like a standalone little moral lesson. Like that's the way we teach the Bible in like Sunday school. Is like, oh, here's today's episode. What's the moral lesson? Well, when you do that, you're just looking at that episode to find the moral lesson. And so you kind of just glean from the top. And so, yeah, I get where people come to that conclusion of just be like, oh, Abraham's the good guy, Lot's the bad guy. Let's ignore the fact that Abraham basically just tossed his wife overboard in the last chapter, right? And just assume that he's like a good guy now, even though he kind of isn't. Um, and I think that leads to a lot of these kind of wishy-washy understandings of the text. Yeah. My goal is to not do that.
No, that's really good. I totally agree that the way the Bible is often taught is like you're saying, like these moral lessons and just like the absolute bare minimum immediate context. And you're like, do you realize that there's, like you said, whole chapters and there's even whole themes running through scripture. And if you don't understand those themes and, the overarching storyline or the motifs, then it kind of just feels like all these random disparate stories.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people, that's how they think of the Bible, and that's where I would say even like agnostics, atheists, that's what they do. They go to these Bible stories and they're like, see what God did? You're like, they're like, we're so offended by what he did. And you're like, but do you understand the entire context? Like God, like I was telling, I can't remember what I was telling recently, but I was telling him like, even the timing of Israel coming out of Egypt was not just about Israel, it was about judging the nations.
Yes.
Because the times of the wickedness of the Amorites had reached its full measure, and arguably the other nations too, and Amorites are only mentioned.
Right.
I don't fully know that. But okay. enough about that.
Just
Yeah,
my point that I want to say on that is that my thing is always because like it's always the like the I don't know, like a thing that you hear atheists say will be like, oh well, like I've read the Bible, and I'm just like, how many times? Like once, like
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
like no one is like a lot of the things that I'm talking about here. It's like uh, I wouldn't expect anyone to pick up on these things on your first time reading it through. You're not supposed to.
I don't
Like
even know if you. I don't
like
even know if you'll pick up on it
yeah,
with just
you
reading. You
can't.
actually need the Holy Spirit.
Well, I mean, I would argue that too, but I'd also be like,
Yeah.
um, I'm like you like there's reasons why it's like okay, meditate on this stuff daily. It's like because there's a lot there, and a lot of things go forward and backward. And it's like so
Mhm.
you have to read it all multiple times, right? And it's like
Mhm.
and to actually to a point that like this is actually also part of the reason why I record these is because it's not as if everything that I'm teaching on this right now. I didn't necessarily teach all of this stuff the last time that I taught Genesis, right? Like there's stuff that I'm teaching now that's different from last time, and there's things that I'm realizing and understanding about the text that's different from whenever I've read it before and previously, and like that's going to happen throughout your life, right? Like the more that you read the text, the more that you understand it in new ways because you're able to relate it to other things in the text. Like you're able to see those hyperlinks more. Um, and so like yeah, my point was just to say like a lot of the layers of the context won't come about through a single reading of it. Like there's a multitude of ways in which we need to think about an individual text and to how to see the connections.
How many passages of Scripture actually kind of talk about that? That the hidden things. That
Right.
God actually hides things for. I think Solomon calls them the kings, and he may have been talking about actual kings, but there's kind of a principle there that, like the hidden things of God, there's things about God that are not immediately revealed, and you are only revealed by as you walk with Him faithfully, and just like the story of Abraham here, or Abram at this point, is it's like you said, he definitely did not understand the exact dimensions or the full dimensions of the promise. I mean,
No, he doesn't.
even in terms of the seed, it's like, well, God, like let me I mean, the even his whole story regarding the seed is like it's clear he doesn't really get it.
Yes.
He kind of gets it, but he doesn't fully get it. So I wanted to make this. I wanted to bring something to the fore and get your thoughts on it because it just kind of popped in my head as you were talking about them going their separate ways. Lot chose the left, and Abram chose the opposite.
Well, and
Um,
let me
yeah.
briefly correct you. We don't know which way they chose.
Oh, okay. I
I
gotcha. I'm not
am
reading the
I
exact
am that
text.
that is,
Okay.
that is my theory is
Oh,
that
okay. Okay.
Lot chose the left and that Abraham chose the right.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. I have a series of questions, and then I have like a thought from Genesis 12, weaving in Genesis 12 into this plot. So number one is I'm curious as to like where they were located. Were they like at the north of the Dead Sea, probably like
Oh, well,
where the Jordan River
look at what we have
intersects?
here.
Shechem, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
I was
that
like,
was
okay.
So there's debate about like where Sodom and Gomorrah is, and
Yes, there
clearly to
is.
the east of the Dead Sea. Some people put it
So
towards the southern end of it. Others,
yes,
yeah.
most things put Sodom and Gomorrah towards the southern portion, kind of down.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys can see my mouse right now, but I'm circling my mouse.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. That's usually where people kind of put Sodom and Gomorrah. And since it says that he goes from there to Hebron, it makes sense to me that, right, because they're coming up, because the Negev is down here. They're coming up out of the Negev, and then then they separate, right? And then he keeps going north towards Hebron. That makes sense to me. Now the thing is that this whole area is kind of the Jordan Valley, is my understanding. So really, it could be anything, or like they could be north of this of the sea, but I don't know. I think it makes sense that it's down here to the south. But yeah.
So here's that's interesting. I also know that like there's a lot of archaeological excavations being made of the northern region, and some people are making claims that there's clear evidence of Sodom and Gomorrah up there. I know that some people say there's clear evidence of the detonation virtually of Sodom and Gomorrah in the south. I think some people talk about what kind of sulfur, like little sulfur
Residue
balls
and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, which I just don't really fully know what to think, to be honest with you. I really just don't know what to think, I don't have a strong opinion on that, so it doesn't really matter.
I mean, my stance on a lot of the archaeology stuff is that archaeology goes slow. I'm sure that more will be found than we expect, but that doesn't mean that we have it now.
Right.
And like the trend line of the last 100 years has only continuously verified the Bible. So I think that trend line will continue. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have everything. So like, I mean, even like the big news like a couple of years ago was all of this stuff coming out of Mount Ebal with like the curse tablet and everything. And then and since then, my understanding is that like a lot of that it hasn't necessarily been debunked, but it's been like highly debated. Because like apparently like they did find it, but like they claimed that like it said like it had a writing on it that said like Yahweh curses, like all the stuff, and a bunch of stuff came out.
Yeah, it was the Joshua curse.
Yes, and a bunch of stuff came out like a year or so afterwards, where people were like, we don't think that the writing's actually on there. We think that people are kind of seeing squiggles in a thing that like, and so it might not actually be there. And so you have this tension, right? Whenever it comes to archaeology, right? And it's like, does that mean that, oh, okay, well, because it got like not debunked, but kind of critiqued, like, does that mean that the whole Joshua story out? Is like, no, it doesn't. It just means more needs to be done, right? And of course, it's always hard to actually get people to do the amount of archaeology that we would want done in this region. Like, I mean, we're American Christians, so we're like, what else are you guys doing over there? Like, this is all you should be doing. But like, there's people that live there, and there's other people that are trying to go to war with those people. So like, there's a lot of stuff going on. And so
that's very true. It's like bombs are whizzing over their head.
Yeah, and we're like, keep digging.
Hey, stick to it. No excuses. Let's go.
Exactly.
All right. So look, in Genesis 12, I think, let's see, some of this is going to be totally speculative, and then I just want to get your thoughts on it. In Genesis 12, Where is it? Okay, so verse 6, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh. It should
Yes.
come at the time the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared, and Abraham said, I always want to revert to Abraham, but
Yeah, I know.
Abraham said, to your offspring I will give this land. So I find it interesting here that, and I'm not saying that Abram's testing God in any ways, but I am kind of curious that you with him saying, hey, Lot, you select. It's in a way, it's really interesting because he knows God has given him very distinct promises about land, and yet he's willing to say, hey, Lot, you choose the land. So that could either be he has total faith that God's going to direct the process, or there's part of me that wonders if he's trying to see where God is expanding him.
So yeah, so okay, so this is like this is where you get into the like, oh man, I don't know how to say it. It's
like what would have happened if like
right.
if Lot chose the other direction?
So there's this element.
Yeah.
Okay, there's this element of randomness going on in the story, right? And elements of randomness. So this is one of the things where I'm like, I don't know the original languages, and I don't know enough about the original languages to know how to make this point. And so this might be like an anachronistic connection because we're speaking English, but to me, there's a connection there with like the fact that his name is Lot, right? And Lot, like, what is your lot in life, right? It's or casting lots, right? That is randomness, right? And so like casting lots for like a lot of things would be like, okay, you have like multiple sticks and like you hold them, right? And then you go, okay, you pick a stick, and then whichever one is like the short one, that's the one that like loses because you can't see the whole like stick, right? And so or casting lots is like sometimes it's just straight up like rolling dice, right? You there's these different methods for casting lots, but they're related to randomness, and randomness is like what you said, of saying like, is he testing God here? Randomness is almost always related to divination, right? And so we're going to see this kind of it shows up a little bit in the story with Joseph, but it shows up even in the New Testament, because in the New Testament they cast lots for who's going to be like the replacement disciple or replacement apostle or whatever, and randomness oftentimes is a way to test or to divine, to figure out, right? This is what divination is. Divination is to divine, to figure out what God's will is. That's what you're doing, right? And so by putting this out of his hands, right, what Abram is doing is putting it into God's hands, right? But to my point earlier, so that this doesn't contradict what I said earlier, because putting it into God's hands is generally a good thing. Generally speaking, casting lots is a bad way to figure out what God's will for your life is. And it's usually a way that an immature person, what my argument would be, is that usually it is a way that an immature person figures out what God's will for their life is. I have a whole thing about how I think that there is a way in which you can be wise and cast lots, but there's a bunch of stipulations for that. And I think you can look at the story of how they're choosing the disciples to figure out what those like wise ways are. But yes, I do agree that there's some of that going on there in this story. I don't know if there was a further question. I kind of interrupted you.
No, I don't know if there was a further question. It's just looking at that going, that's really interesting that Abram knows he has these promises. And the promises were made further north in Shechem.
Yes.
And if the argument is that where this divide takes place is at the bottom of the Dead Sea, then in essence, you would be saying Abraham might interpret that as, well, then my boundary lines are actually from Shechem down to here at least at this
Sure.
point. I'm not saying that he would essentially be interpreting that as God's prophetic word to him, but there is an element of me going, you put that much trust in God and in turn through maybe God's agent in Lot to select the opposite of what you're going to do, which ultimately defined Israel's boundary lines to an extent. Like, so if Lot would have selected the other way, then, theoretically you're like, well, Israel would be more of a horizontal nation more so than, yeah.
So, okay, so I disagree with this to a certain extent. Because, and I disagree with it based off of what I said earlier about the left hand, right hand symbolism stuff. And I think that part of the obscurity of the left hand, right hand stuff is to say that we don't really know which side he picked, right? That's part of the reason why it's obscure. And what I would argue is that, so we're going to get, this starts getting into like a lot of the, it starts getting a lot of into the free will, Calvinism, determinism stuff, and I'm going to try and stay away from that at the moment and just stick with the symbolism point that I'm trying to make. The symbolism point that I'm trying to make is that it kind of doesn't matter which side gets chosen. In the end, God is going to bring you back to where he wants you to be, right? And so I would argue that in like the counterfactual world where Lot chooses the not Jordan Valley, something would have happened to Abram, which would have brought him back into the land proper, and he would have still had it, right? That's what I would argue.
No, I totally get that.
Yeah,
It makes a lot of sense, and that is like a whole the whole mystery of potential. What would you say, like potentiality or whatever, or like
yes,
hypotheticals. Here's the thing: is like it's not real, but it kind of is real.
yes,
Like, because, and that's sometimes it's a little bit confusing because it even applies to people's salvation. Like, theoretically or hypothetically, everybody can get saved, but and even this, like, hypothetically, the Israelites could have obeyed the law and not been exiled from the land. Hypothetically, they could have, but
hypothetically, everyone could be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect.
Yeah, but it's like, and I don't really have all that figured out. I'll just be honest with you. It's like a whole nother realm that sometimes I try to think about because I think that it's real. In fact, I think it's the only way that God could actually truly judge men is if there's actual real potential. If there's not real potential, then how is God exiling
how is the
Israel into the
responsibility?
nation for disobedience?
Yeah.
Like, they're not fake commands.
Yep.
They're real. But sometimes the way like people treat them is like, oh, God, those were all kind of fake.
Yes.
And God didn't really mean it. He didn't really mean like
that actually what you're arguing right now is basically what Martin Luther argues in Bondage of the Will. He basically argues that like, yeah, it's not possible, and God is just saying it to show how bad it is, and it's like,
Yeah, that's nonsense.
yeah, it's nonsense.
It's total
yeah,
nonsense because
it's
then
total-
like
yeah.
men are not. There's this element of like, yeah, God is God. Like God, like Paul argues, I think in Romans 9, sure, but there's also a reality of like culpability, and just the mere logic of culpability requires true potential.
Yeah.
And if you don't have true potential, then culpability disappears. Quite honestly, so there has to be a true opportunity, and I don't know how we got off on this, so my bad.
No, that's fine.
No, but I think it's relevant because it kind of goes back to the Abraham and Lot situation where, they could have just amended things and then lived in the land, and then Lot wouldn't have like gone through that whole thing with Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
It's That's interesting because, like, I mean, I always thought it was like, I always saw Abraham as a super righteous man, but as I've gotten older and I've read the scriptures of Abraham more, I'm like, he was kind of a rascal, and so were these other guys, and they sort of like,
they're all pretty much rascals. Yeah.
yeah, and they, especially in the beginning, like, um, they were not like, you would see the things that they did and you'd be like, that's not a good guy. Like, he
Yeah.
lies, he deceives, like, he's stolen, he's dishonest, like, he's drinks or sleeps around, and like,
Yep.
it's like, but yet God calls these men righteous and faithful, and seems like he had a plan all along. So I think it's super interesting.
Yeah. I think that there's a very clear like. It's interesting that I think it's very interesting that Jews like one of the fundamentally different things about Judaism versus the surrounding pagan religions is that the Jewish God cares about morality, like he cares about ethics. Pretty much all of the other pantheons and whatever, yeah, it's kind of whatever. Like you do stuff to please or honor the individual god that you care about, and maybe that god cares about some ethical things or whatever, but usually they don't. Usually they have their own kind of whims or whatever. Like, but the Jewish God really seems to care, which is why he makes this whole like law thing about how they're supposed to act and be different, right? And so you have that, but at the same time, all of their accounts of the people that are following it, they just don't do it, right? And so by virtue of what it is, what the Pentateuch is, what the text is, it makes this longing for a figure that will do that. It makes this kind of hole where it's like, hey, who's going to get it right? And so this is sort of where this, in my opinion, this is sort of where you see these bubbling up of these messianic desires, and eventually these become full-on messianic prophecies, right? And like explicit. But I think a lot of that comes from this tension of, well, we have a God that really seems to care about morality, and none of our ancestors did it. So who's going to like make that happen? and it's a thing that it's a tension that they still have, right? Like it's a tension that Jews today still have, and it's one of the things where I'm just like, oh, it's really nice that Jesus fits right into that spot and that space, right? And to me, it's just something that you don't. I mean, I don't know. I don't know of any other like. I see that as a right. It's not an explicit prophecy. It's like a thematic prophecy, right? It's like just the themes of what the text is brings these things out, and then opens up this space that Jesus ends up filling.
All right, so I got a question on that, Kyle. Is not like you're saying some stuff that has my brain going here, and that is, do you believe that like what was it called, like anthropomorphic descriptions of God in terms of him caring and having weakness, or not weakness, but like he truly cares about going all the way back to Genesis, where um Adam and Eve sinned, and it says he regretted making man, and so there's obviously like this. It's like this. Well, it's a weakness in some sense, like not a weakness. I may not have the perfect words here, but there's
A
there's a
human-like quality.
yeah, like a human like quality. So
Sure.
then you fast forward. Well, let's go to the law, because now you've introduced the law and said, unlike the foreign gods, Yahweh cared. Like he cared about righteousness, he cared
Yes.
about holiness. And when they didn't live up to it, it says he is a jealous God.
Yes.
And so, like, in jealousy, almost like in our finite minds, implies a certain degree of neediness. Like, I need you. I like, as though God actually needs us. We know he ultimately doesn't. But you kind of wonder if all of that is kind of like what you're saying, building to the ultimate, to the incarnation ultimately, where you get the full expression of deity in human form, expressing that type of stuff. And at the end of it, Jesus is weeping over Jerusalem, saying, "You who kill the prophets, how I long to gather you." Like, I don't know if you're following kind of how I'm connecting these different things. I guess
think
I'm saying,
so.
is some of that language like incarnational? That's maybe the easiest way of saying it. Like, just the way that God cares, and even his jealous nature, where he's condescending to our level, in a sense, to even care about it. So it's just a question.
I would say that. So I did talk about this whenever
Okay.
we like, if you go back and you listen to them, I did talk about this.
Like, would that have been like
The regret
the
one where it says like God like
Genesis
regret.
3, I think? Genesis 3 or 4?
Well, he says it in regards to the Noah to flooding, and he says I
Oh,
regret
that's right.
making
Okay.
man. You know,
Okay.
and I talked about it there. And
Okay.
what I said there is that um, I don't believe that we should that yes, this is anthropomorphic language, but in the same way that anthropomorphic language is used in Genesis 1, I don't believe that just because anthropomorphic language is used that we should understand it of what's going on in the same exact way as the way that it typically works for humans. And I gave a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
examples about um like uh right like that regret could have like for most of us, regret has a, because we are creatures that live in time, regret has a suddenness aspect to it. And so it's like, oh, I didn't regret at this point in time, but now I do regret. And I'm like, no, I don't think that that's what's going on. I think like I don't think I was like, I
That
don't
makes
think God
sense.
is
That
being
makes sense. So it's,
surprised,
yeah.
but there's a way in which you could not be surprised by an event and still regret the event, right? And I did, and to me, I think that I gave an example about about being in a relationship and like having kids, and like if like you kicked your kids out of your house, and I don't want to re-go over all of that, but just to make the point of, I think that whenever anthropomorphic language gets used of God, that I do agree that it is correct to modify our understanding of those descriptions in a way that makes sense with the totality of what we know about God. And so I don't think that those descriptions are God condescending to us. I think it is the biblical writers condescending or attempting to condescend something about God so that it can be framed to the readers. I think that's what's going on. And so in that way, it's similar to the incarnation, because just the incarnation is God condescending. And so, like, I don't totally disagree.
Well, I'm not. First of all, I'm not making a hard statement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I'm just thinking out loud because it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's something that I would need to think about more. But yeah, there's I don't think there's nothing there.
I do agree with you. Like anthropomorphic descriptions given to God should not be viewed in the precise way that we do things. And I think that there's a huge danger in that. Like, if you think God is jealous in the same way that a girlfriend gets jealous when you cheat on her, then you have a very, very diminished view of God.
Yeah.
Like, as though he's like somehow lost control of the plot.
Right.
He has not lost control of the plot. He's always has control of the plot. And so I totally.
And
I understand. I understand why there would be hesitancy to say this is all incarnational, because that in essence is trying to say that God is like us in every way. All of his emotions are like ours.
Right.
Because Christ experienced emotions that you and I experience.
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah.
And I would just say that, like, so, like, for example, for like the regret one, right? It's like, if you apply these tangential properties to a description, right? So, like, the regret having this suddenness aspect to it, but like, oh, I didn't regret at this point, and now I regret at this point. And I apply this even to whenever it says like God remembered, because then it says God remembered Noah. It's like, oh, did God forget Noah? Right? It's like, no, it's talking about something else. It's talking about like attention, right? And like, when it does that, the problem is that if you apply those tangential properties, you now have to have a view of God that no longer fits with the rest of the text. And like, to even what you said, like, what did you say? You said like God didn't lose the plot, right? Like, almost all of the time, whenever it's talking about God in relationship to time, God's predicting things. God's calling the shots, right? And the reason why it has him calling the shots and predicting things is to demonstrate the fact that he has control of the situation. That's the whole point of it saying that. That's the point of God saying, hey, you're going to be in Egypt for 400 years, and then they go down into Egypt for 400 years. It's the point of when Jesus says, hey, in 3 days' time, the Son of Man is going to be like, or in such and such a time, the Son of Man is going to be killed, and then will rise up in like 3 days and all this stuff, right? The point of him saying that is so that when stuff starts to go bad, you are able to remember, oh, actually, God has this accounted for. God has this under control. That's the entire reason of stating that. And so if you start to apply these other properties of, oh, well, maybe God doesn't know what's going on, right? Which is what dynamic omniscience, open theist people do. You then have to just completely throw out all of the other themes of what the Bible is doing with that. And to me, it just makes it very messy.
I also like on this subject. I always found it fascinating because, like, even Jesus before he goes to the cross, he's literally crying blood and he's asking for the cup to pass. And so, like, you see these moments in time, like even when he says, "I regret making them," they're very, he's past, present, and future. But in the present, when he's experiencing, it's like he's experiencing it in the present, knowing what's happening, but he's present in the moment. And so you see
Oh
that
yeah.
kind of all throughout scripture where he displays emotions like he's a man.
Oh
Not
yeah.
that he is a man, but he display I mean, we inherit that from him. So even though he knows it's coming, he's very active emotionally in the moment. And so you even see hyperbolic language where God's like, "That's it. I'm done. I'm going to destroy them completely." And I do think that's like God in the present, like speaking through the prophets, the emotion coursing through him, saying, "My wrath is coming. I am furious, and like I'm going to demonstrate it with my words, and in power."
Well, and I think that this is related to, like, I think it's common for people to think of emotions as like less than or base, right? Like crude, animalistic, right? And so a lot of times we tend to think of God as being like stoic, right? Um, and kind of just devoid of emotion. And I think and that's not all really, like, actually a lot of the Greek pantheon, like I said earlier, um, the gods are fickle and are overly swayed by emotions and all that stuff. And I think that what we can glean from the text is that God has kind of this, like, this mixture of both. Of I do think that God feels emotions and feels them in a deep sense, probably deeper than like what we all feel, right? And I think about this a lot, like especially with um like Jesus on the cross, right? And like whenever we say something like right, this idea of like what's that song or whatever, like when Jesus was on the cross he thought of me, right? And it's like in order for that to apply to actually every human being that like ever existed, it's like that's that is the most intense emotion any human being could possibly ever feel. like there's nothing more than that. um uh, there's nothing more that a human could feel than the sin of the whole world being put on them, um and having it put on them voluntarily. um and so yeah, like, um I'm sort of forgetting the basis of the question at the moment. Um, but I think the point that I wanted to make is, um, yeah, I think that God probably feels emotions even more than we do. Um, it's just that he is not swayed from his plan. He has emotions, and because he has the emotions, he made a plan to redeem those emotions to get to the state that he wants to get in. And so he doesn't deviate from the plan, not really. Although there is a story.
Well,
about
you're
Jesus, but
you're a
you can bring that up.
Molinist, right? You're a Molinist,
Yes,
right?
I
So
am.
in some sense,
Me too.
which I think it's interesting.
It's the right position. You'll come over.
It's really the
But
only option.
I'm definitely not like, yeah, okay, but as a Molinist, and this is going to be there's no perfect metaphor, okay? There's no, or analogy, I should say. But in some sense, it's like if I watch The Sound of Music, which I've seen about 30 times in my life, probably,
Sure.
there might be moments where I still feel a sense of joy, or I have a sense of sadness, even though I know exactly what's going to happen. I
Oh,
mean,
sure.
I can virtually quote it for you. I mean,
Yes.
not exactly, because I'm not good at that stuff, but I've watched it enough to where I should be able to quote it.
Sure.
I know exactly where it's going, and I feel like that's a horrible, horrible analogy, because I think that,
No, I know what you're getting at. Yeah, I know what you're getting at.
but it's like, because we're not like just this we're not a movie in God's eyes where like there's it's a low stakes game. Like, God doesn't view us as a low stakes game, I don't believe.
Oh, no.
Like,
No.
like this is high stakes, whereas a movie is low stakes. It doesn't matter what happens in the movie because it's not real. But anyways, I'm just kind of thinking
That
out
takes us
loud.
down a different
I
road,
sometimes
but
try to
yeah.
understand how God experiences emotion, even though he knows precisely what's going to happen. It's even, God is God. He's so far beyond even that simple analogy. I realize that it's just a very simple way of trying to understand him.
So I have this idea. When Jesus was in the garden and he's, like crying blood and all that stuff, that emotion that he's feeling at that point in time is an emotion and a tension that the Word had prior to creation. Because like if you go back and like you listen to like how like I think I've told you guys this before, but I'll reiterate it here because it's worth reiterating. I think that the meaning of life is fellowship with God and man in creation, and that the core of that meaning has to be love, like because you can't have fellowship with those other things if you don't have love. And the core of love is a choice. You can't have love if there's no choice. And so as soon as you realize that the core of this reality is choice, you then realize that the correct choice isn't going to be made. And since the correct choice isn't going to be made, a sacrifice has to be made. Something has to be done to correct the choice, right? There has to be redemption. And so this is, we have this idea that like that the plan of the cross was, made before the foundation of the world. And so if that is true, then that means that the tension involved in God, the emotion involved in God to do that action, to bring that about, has been there since the beginning. It's just that we don't see it until it shows up on Jesus' face at that point in time, right? And I think that is very similar to what you just said about the whole idea of, oh, if I go and watch The Sound of Music, like, I know how I'm going to feel at those certain spots. Like, I know, like, there's like 2 songs that I know that if I play those songs, I might not like outright cry, but like I'll start to tear up. And like I know that will happen. And even though I'm not like feeling that emotion right now, whenever I get to that point, I will feel it. And I do think that is something like what's going on.
Yeah, I agree.
Like with Jesus. Something like that is what's happening there. It's like he knows that emotion is going to be there because that emotion is based off of other connections that he already had previously. It's just, it doesn't show up until you're in that situation.
But wouldn't you say it's like that, but it's on a higher plane? So in one sense, in one sense we can give it an analog, but in another sense, it's like he experiences these divine emotions that are beyond what what we can comprehend.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's cool. That's cool.
Well, I'm gonna end it there because it's 9:30. But
I don't know how we ended up there. Lot and Abram somehow lead to
a long
Monism,
a long
predestination,
sojourn.
Arminianism.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you.